The transport ship docked at Station Athos 9 with a soft hiss of pressure seals, and 5 humans stepped off into a world that did not want them. The station was enormous. It stretched across the darkness of space like a city turned on its side, with towers of glass and metal reaching in every direction. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species walked its corridors, flew through its open atriums, or slithered along its heated floor paths. The air smelled like copper and flowers and something electric that none of the humans could name. This was the Galactic Union Joint Military Academy, the most respected officer training facility in known space, and it had been running for over 600 years without ever admitting a single human. Until now. Cadet Sergeant Mara Okonkwo walked at the front of her squad. She was tall and lean, with dark skin and close-cropped hair, and she moved with the kind of calm that made people either trust her completely or become very nervous. Behind her walked Ren Vasquez, a stocky engineer with a permanent grin and oil stains on his uniform that he had somehow picked up during the shuttle ride. Next to him was Jaewon Park, thin and quiet, his eyes moving constantly, watching everything and everyone. Lena Brask brought up the left flank, broad-shouldered and solid, her jaw set like she was already expecting a fight. And on the right was Priya Nair, who was talking quietly into a small recorder, already taking notes on the station layout, the traffic patterns, the placement of security cameras. They were the first human squad ever permitted to attend the academy. Humanity had joined the Galactic Union only 12 years ago, and most species still did not know what to make of them. Humans came from Earth, a planet that the Union had officially classified as a Class 12 death world. This meant that by galactic standards, Earth was a hellscape of extreme gravity, violent weather, toxic atmosphere variations, and an ecosystem where practically every living thing was either eating something else or trying very hard not to be eaten. The fact that humans had not only survived on such a world, but had built civilizations, split atoms, and reached the stars was a source of endless confusion and quiet horror among the Union's older species. Most aliens looked at humans the way a person might look at a cockroach that had learned to drive a car. Impressive, perhaps, but deeply unsettling. The stares began immediately. A group of Felisari cadets, tall and furred with wide golden eyes, stopped their conversation to watch the humans pass. A cluster of Drovani, squat beings with 4 arms and rocky skin, stepped aside with more distance than was necessary. Someone in the crowd made a clicking sound that the humans' translation implants rendered as laughter. Mara did not react. She had read the briefing files. She knew what they were walking into. She also knew that reacting to insults was a luxury they could not afford. They were here to prove something, and they would prove it with results, not words. Their quarters were in the far corner of the residential block, as far from the central facilities as physically possible. The rooms were small and cold, and clearly had not been updated in years. Ren looked around, knocked on a wall, and said it reminded him of his college dorm. Lena said it was better than boot camp. Priya had already begun rearranging the furniture to create a planning space. The briefing for the capstone exercise came the next morning. Every final-year cadet squad attended, filling a massive amphitheater that descended in wide steps toward a central holographic display. The humans were seated in the highest row, at the very back. Whether this was by assignment or by unspoken agreement among the other species, none of them could say. Instructor General Torvon Jess entered the amphitheater, and the room went silent. Jess was a Kailori, a species that resembled massive 4-legged reptiles covered in dark green scales. He stood nearly 3 meters tall at the shoulder, and his voice resonated through the room like a drum. He had been designing and running the Academy's war simulations for over 40 years, and he had never once been impressed by a cadet team. He did not expect this year to be any different. He activated the holographic display, and a map of stars filled the center of the room. 12 star systems, 2 major power blocks, dozens of minor factions, trade routes, military installations, civilian populations. This was the Chthon scenario, the Academy's most famous and most difficult capstone exercise. It was modeled on a real war that had lasted 10 years and killed billions. The simulation was designed to be just as brutal. Its artificial intelligence adapted to every decision, punished every mistake, and exploited every weakness. No cadet team had ever resolved it in under 6 months of simulated time. The all-time record was 4 months and 11 days, set by a Vellani-led team 90 years ago, and it was considered one of the greatest achievements in the Academy's history. Jess laid out the rules. Each team would command a mid-sized faction caught between the 2 warring blocks. They would have limited forces, limited resources, and no clear advantage. They would operate with full strategic autonomy, meaning no guidance, no hints, and no second chances. The simulation ran in real time, with 1 minute of real time equaling roughly 6 days of simulated time. Teams would be judged on their final outcome, their losses, and the stability of whatever peace they managed to create, if they managed to create one at all. Most teams, Jess said flatly, did not. As the briefing ended and the cadets filed out, Mara noticed a figure waiting near the exit. Cadet Commander Silith Ore was the top-ranked cadet at the Academy. A Vellani with a slender insectoid frame, iridescent wings folded neatly behind her back, and large, multifaceted eyes that reflected the corridor lights like gems. She was elegant, brilliant, and she looked at the human squad the way someone might look at mud on their shoes. She spoke to Mara directly, her translator rendering her words in a flat, pleasant tone that did not match the sharpness of her meaning. She said she hoped the humans would not embarrass themselves too badly. She said the simulation required strategic thinking, not the brute survival instincts of a Deathworld species. She said, with a small tilt of her head, that she hoped they would not try to eat the scenario. Several nearby cadets laughed. Mara looked at Silith for a long moment. Then she smiled, politely, and said thank you for the advice. That night, the 5 humans gathered in their small quarters around a table covered in holographic displays and data files. They had the full briefing packet for the Chthon scenario, and they went through it piece by piece. Ren pulled up the engineering specs of every major installation in the simulation. Jaewon mapped the communications networks and intelligence gaps. Priya built a complete model of every supply chain, trade route, and economic dependency in the theater. Lena studied the military assets and identified the key command nodes on both sides. And Mara sat in the center and listened to all of it, turning the pieces over in her mind, looking for the shape underneath. After 3 hours of work, she leaned back and looked at her squad. Everyone else, she said, was going to treat this like a war. They were going to build fleets, fight battles, and try to win through force. That was what the simulation expected. That was what 100 years of Academy doctrine taught. They were not going to do that. Ren raised an eyebrow. Lena cracked her knuckles. Jaewon said nothing, but pulled up a new screen. Priya began a fresh document. Mara told them what she saw. She said the Chthon scenario was not a military problem. It was a systems problem. The war existed because of economics, politics, fear, and pride. The fleets were symptoms. If they attacked the disease instead of the symptoms, the whole thing would collapse. They worked until morning. None of them slept. By the time the station lights brightened to simulate dawn, they had a plan that no species in the history of the Galactic Union had ever attempted. And every single part of it came from human history. The simulation began at exactly the 9th hour of station time, and 30 cadet teams across the Academy entered the Chthon scenario simultaneously. Each team sat in their own command pod, a sealed room filled with holographic displays, tactical interfaces, and communication terminals. The simulation fed them data in real time, and they gave orders in real time, and the AI behind it all watched every decision with cold, patient intelligence. In the observation gallery above the command pods, Instructor General Jess settled into his chair. Around him sat the Academy's senior instructors, several visiting officers from the Union fleet, and a handful of cadet teams who had already completed their own exercises and wanted to watch. Large screens displayed the feeds from every team's command pod, but the central screen, the largest one, showed the overall state of the simulation. 2 massive fleets, 12 star systems, billions of simulated lives. A war that had been burning for years before the teams even entered it. Jess watched the human team's feed with casual interest. He expected them to spend their first minutes studying the map and arguing about what to do. That was what every team did. The humans did not argue. They did not study the map. They had already studied it. The moment the simulation activated, Mara gave a single nod, and her squad moved like a machine that had been built for exactly this moment. Each of them turned to their station and began working on tasks they had clearly planned the night before. J1 did not look at the enemy fleets. He did not check military positions or scan for threats. Instead, he launched a full signals intelligence sweep of every communication channel in the theater, including those belonging to allied factions, neutral factions, and civilian networks. He was not looking for military secrets. He was looking for money, trade agreements, debt records, supply contracts, the invisible threads that held the war economy together. Next to him, Priya was building something on her display that looked less like a battle plan and more like a financial spreadsheet. She was mapping every supply chain in the simulation, not just military supply chains, but civilian ones: food, fuel, medical supplies, manufacturing components. She was tracking where everything came from, where it went, and who could not survive without it. Ren had pulled up the engineering blueprints for every major installation in the theater. He was not looking at weapon systems or shield generators. He was looking at power grids, ventilation systems, water recyclers, and docking ports. He was looking for the parts that nobody thought about until they stopped working. Lena had the tactical display open, but she was not planning attacks. She was identifying the command and control structure of both enemy blocks. She was finding the specific officers, stations, and communication relays that held each military hierarchy together. She was looking for the pins that, if pulled, would make everything fall apart. And Mara sat at the center, watching all of it flow together, saying very little, waiting for the picture to become clear. 5 real-time minutes passed. In the simulation, this was roughly 1 month. In the gallery, Jess noticed something odd. The human team had not moved a single ship. They had not fired a single weapon. They had not even contacted their own allies. Every other team in the exercise was already positioning fleets, requesting reinforcements, or building defensive lines. The humans were just sitting there, reading data. An instructor beside Jess made a quiet comment about the humans being frozen with indecision. Jess said nothing. Something about the look on the human squad leader's face told him this was not indecision. At the 6-minute mark, J1 spoke. He had found what he was looking for. 3 supply nodes in the simulation, not military bases, but civilian trade hubs, served as the primary source of refined fuel for the entire Western Bloc's forward fleet positions. If those nodes were disrupted, the Western Bloc's ability to sustain offensive operations would collapse within weeks of simulated time. And the nodes were barely defended, because nobody had ever thought to attack civilian infrastructure in the simulation. It was not in any Academy textbook. It was not considered proper warfare. Mara gave the order. Their small fleet, which every other team would have used for defensive positioning, was split into 3 fast task forces. They did not attack the trade hubs. That would have drawn attention and unified opposition against them. Quiet, surgical, almost polite blockades. They stopped and inspected every cargo ship. They delayed every shipment. They turned a river of supplies into a trickle. In the gallery, the chatter stopped. Jess leaned forward in his chair. On the central display, the Western Bloc supply indicators began to flicker yellow. At the 10-minute mark, the second phase began. While the Western Bloc scrambled to figure out why their fuel shipments were late, J1 launched what Mara called the Whisper Campaign. He had spent the previous minutes mapping the communication networks of both warring blocs, and now he used that knowledge to begin feeding false intelligence into their systems. Carefully crafted messages, disguised as intercepted enemy communications, began appearing in the inboxes of key military commanders on both sides. The messages told the Western Bloc that the Eastern Bloc was preparing a massive surprise attack. The messages told the Eastern Bloc that the Western Bloc was developing a superweapon. None of it was true. All of it was believable. And the beauty of it was that both sides were already paranoid after years of war. They wanted to believe the worst about each other. J1 did not have to convince them of anything. He just had to give their fear a direction. At the 15-minute mark, Mara opened diplomatic channels, but not with the major powers. She reached out to the small factions, the forgotten ones, the ones that every other team ignored, mining colonies, border stations, refugee settlements, independent trading guilds. She did not ask them for soldiers or ships. She asked them what they needed. She asked them what they were afraid of. She listened. Priya followed up every conversation with a concrete offer. Protection for trade routes, medical supplies from their own reserves, favorable trade terms, small things that cost the human faction very little, but meant everything to a struggling colony on the edge of a war zone. One by one, the small factions began to trust the humans, not as conquerors or generals, but as partners. In the gallery, Silith Ore had stopped watching her own data analysis, and was now staring at the human team's feed. Her mandibles clicked rapidly, a Volani sign of deep agitation. She had spent months preparing her own approach to the Krithan scenario. Her plan had been a masterpiece of military positioning and fleet coordination, refined over hundreds of hours of study. The humans were doing something she had never considered. They were not fighting the war at all. They were fighting the reasons for the war. At the 25-minute mark, the Western Bloc's supply crisis reached a breaking point. Their forward fleet positions began pulling back to conserve fuel. Two sector admirals exchanged threats over open channels. The cracks were spreading. And then Ren found the thing that changed everything. Deep in the engineering data, buried under layers of routine maintenance reports, he discovered that the Western Bloc's central command station, the flagship of their entire military hierarchy, routed its primary power grid through a single junction that was serviced by a network of automated maintenance drones. The drones operated on a separate, low-security communication frequency that nobody had thought to protect, because nobody had ever thought to attack maintenance drones. Ren showed J1. J1 smiled for the first time since the simulation began. It took him 4 minutes of real time to crack the drone network's encryption. At the 29-minute mark, the drones received new instructions. They did not attack the station. They simply stopped working. Power conduits went unrepaired. Cooling systems drifted out of alignment. The flagship station did not explode. It simply went dark, piece by piece, like a city losing electricity block by block. The Western Bloc's command structure, which depended entirely on that station for coordination, went blind. Fleet commanders could not reach their superiors. Orders stopped flowing. For 72 simulated hours, the most powerful military force in the theater could not talk to itself. Mara did not waste a single second of that window. She gave Lena command of their fleet for the first and only offensive operation of this phase. Lena moved with terrifying speed. She did not attack enemy warships. She targeted communications relays, fuel depots, and sensor arrays. She disabled them, one after another, in a precise sequence that Priya had calculated to create maximum confusion with minimum destruction. They were trying to blind them and starve them. In the gallery, Jess realized he had been holding his breath. He exhaled slowly, his scales shifting to a lighter shade. Beside him, an instructor whispered that the humans were not fighting like soldiers. Jess corrected her quietly. He said the humans were fighting like something the galaxy had never seen before. On the other side of the simulation, the Eastern Bloc watched the Western Bloc collapse in real time. Their commanders saw an opportunity too perfect to resist. Just as Jaewon's false intelligence had predicted, they launched a massive offensive into Western territory, sending their fleets deep into enemy space. They did not realize they were doing exactly what the humans wanted. They did not realize that every move they made was stretching their supply lines thinner and thinner, pulling them further and further from safety. They did not realize that the 5 quiet cadets in the corner command pod had just set the trap that would end a 10-year war. And the simulation was only 35 minutes old. Word had spread across Station Athos 9 like a fire through dry grass. Something was happening in the observation gallery. Something that had never happened before. By the 35th minute of the simulation, the gallery was packed with bodies. Cadets from every year and every species had abandoned their studies to come and watch. Instructors had left their offices. Even maintenance workers and kitchen staff had drifted in, standing on their toes at the back of the room, trying to see the screens. The central display told the story in cold, clear data. The Western Bloc was crippled. Its command station was still dark. Its fleet was scattered and confused, and its supply lines were in ruins. The Eastern Bloc had surged forward into the vacuum, seizing territory and resources with the greedy speed of a predator that smells blood. And in the middle of it all, the human faction, the smallest and weakest force in the entire theater, sat quietly at the center of a web that nobody else could see. Mara Okonkwo was watching the clock. Not the simulation clock, which showed months passing with every minute. The real clock. She had told her squad they would finish this in under an hour, and she intended to keep that promise. At the 36-minute mark, she told Priya it was time. Priya Nair had been working non-stop since the simulation began, and the thing she had built was not a battle plan. It was a treaty. Over the past simulated months, she had been in constant contact with the 14 neutral and minor factions that Mara had courted. She had learned their fears, their needs, their grievances. She had offered them solutions that did not require them to fight or surrender. And now she sent each of them the same message at the same time. The message was an invitation to join a mutual defense and trade pact under human faction leadership. It was not a military alliance. It did not ask anyone to go to war. It simply said that the members of this pact would trade with each other, protect each other's borders, and refuse to do business with any faction that continued to wage aggressive war. It was an economic coalition, a wall made not of guns and ships, but of money and cooperation. 12 of the 14 factions accepted within minutes of simulated time. The other 2 accepted within days. They had been waiting for someone to offer them a way out that did not involve choosing between 2 terrible sides. The humans had given them a third option. In the gallery, Instructor General Jess watched the simulation map change color. The neutral zones, which had been gray, began turning blue, the color of the human faction. Not because the humans had conquered them, because they had chosen to join. One by one, like lights turning on across a dark city, the small factions aligned themselves with the 5 cadets from Earth. Jess understood what was happening, and it frightened him. The simulation's AI was designed to adapt. It had been built to counter military strategies, to punish reckless aggression, to reward patience and tactical brilliance. For 100 years, it had done this perfectly. But it had been designed around a fundamental assumption that every faction in the scenario would pursue military dominance. That was how wars worked. That was how they had always worked in every simulation the Academy had ever run. The humans had broken that assumption. They had created a coalition that did not need to fight. It just needed to exist. Its economic power alone was enough to make continued war financially impossible. The two warring blocs depended on trade with the neutral factions for everything from food to ship components. With those factions now unified under the human coalition and refusing to trade with aggressors, the cost of war had suddenly become infinite. The AI recalculated. It ran thousands of projections, and for the first time in the history of the Krython scenario, it could not find a path that allowed the war to continue at its current scale. The humans had not beaten the simulation's military challenge. They had made the military challenge irrelevant. At the 42nd minute, the Western Bloc broke first. Their commanders had been struggling to rebuild their shattered infrastructure while fending off the Eastern Bloc's advance. Now, with the neutral factions cutting off trade, they faced a simple and terrible choice: continue fighting and starve, or accept peace and survive. Mara's ceasefire terms arrived on their desks at exactly the right moment, as if she had known to the hour when they would be desperate enough to listen. And her terms were generous. That was the part that confused everyone watching in the gallery. The humans were winning. They could have demanded anything. Instead, Mara offered reconstruction aid, trade normalization, prisoner exchanges, and a seat at the coalition table. She was not punishing the Western Bloc. She was inviting them in. A Kalori instructor in the gallery asked Jess why the humans would show mercy to a defeated enemy. Jess did not answer immediately. He was thinking about something he had read in a human history file. Something about a country that had won a great war and then helped rebuild the nations it had defeated, turning enemies into allies within a generation. He had dismissed it as propaganda when he first read it. Now, he was not so sure. Their fleets stood down. Their systems opened to coalition trade. In a matter of simulated days, they went from a combatant to a partner. The Eastern Bloc did not accept. Their fleet commanders were drunk on victory. They had seized vast stretches of Western territory. They had captured shipyards and fuel reserves and military bases. Their government was celebrating what they believed was the turning point of the war. They looked at the human coalition and saw a temporary inconvenience, a collection of small factions playing at politics while real powers fought real battles. Mara had predicted this. In fact, she had counted on it. At the 48th minute, she gave Lena control of the combined fleet. It was no longer just the small human task force. The Western Bloc's surviving ships had joined the coalition, and several minor factions had contributed their own defense forces. It was still smaller than the Eastern Bloc's armada, but Lena did not need a bigger fleet. She needed a smarter one. Priya had identified the perfect location. The Varith Corridor was a narrow hyperspace junction between two gas giants, and it was the only fast route between the Eastern Bloc's new conquests and their home territory. Every supply ship, every reinforcement, every communication relay passed through that corridor. It was a bottleneck, and the Eastern Bloc had been using it without worry, because nobody had ever been in a position to threaten it. Until now. Lena positioned the coalition fleet at both ends of the corridor. Ren had modified the fleet's formation based on something he had read about a naval battle on Earth hundreds of years ago, where a smaller fleet had trapped a larger one in a narrow strait and destroyed it ship by ship. The principle was simple. In a tight space, numbers do not matter. Only positioning and speed matter. Jaewon launched one final wave of electronic warfare. He jammed the Eastern Bloc's communication frequencies, spoofed their sensor readings, and fed false coordinates to their navigation systems. Their fleet commanders thought the corridor was clear. Their sensors told them there was nothing ahead but open space. They were wrong. The Battle of the Verath Corridor lasted 11 simulated hours, and it was not a battle in the way the galaxy understood battles. There was no grand exchange of fleet fire, no dramatic charges, no heroic last stands. It was a trap, clean and ruthless and precise. The Eastern Bloc's forward fleet entered the corridor and found coalition ships waiting at every exit. Lena's forces did not try to destroy the enemy. They disabled engines, knocked out weapons, and jammed escape pods with surrender frequencies. Ship after ship went dark, unable to fight, unable to flee, unable to call for help. The Eastern Bloc lost 40% of its forward fleet in those 11 hours. But the true blow came at the end, when a small boarding team, operating under close-quarters combat protocols that Lena had adapted from human military doctrine, breached the flagship of the Eastern Bloc's Supreme Commander and captured it intact. The simulation AI had never encountered boarding tactics like these. Human close combat doctrine was designed for fighting in the tight corridors and crushing gravity of Deathworld environments. Against species that had evolved on gentler worlds, it was overwhelming. The Supreme Commander was captured alive. The flagship was taken without a single hull breach. In the gallery, nobody spoke. The screen showed the Verath corridor filled with drifting, disabled ships, their lights blinking in surrender patterns. The Coalition fleet moved through them slowly, carefully, offering aid to damaged vessels, even as they accepted their surrender. Instructor General Jess was standing. He did not remember when he had stood up. His datapad had fallen from his hands to the floor at some point during the battle, and he had not noticed. He stared at the central display, at the blue markers of the human coalition, spreading across the map like dawn light, and he felt something he had not felt in 40 years of military service. He felt afraid, not of what the humans had done in the simulation, but of what it meant that they had done it so easily. They had not struggled. They had not agonized over decisions or scrambled to adapt. Every move they had made, from the first embargo to the final boarding action, had been part of a single, seamless plan. And every part of that plan had come from somewhere in their species' long, bloody, brilliant history. These 5 young cadets, barely adults by human standards, had taken 10,000 years of warfare and compressed it into a single hour of perfect execution. And the worst part, the part that made Jess's scales go pale, was that they had made it look routine. The observation gallery had become something it had never been before. Faculty members from departments that had nothing to do with military training were standing along the back walls. The Academy's head administrator had taken a seat in the front row without saying a word to anyone. And on a secure channel that Jess had not authorized but did not shut down, 3 senior officers from Galactic Union High Command were watching the live feed from a battleship stationed 2 systems away. 52 minutes had passed since the simulation began. In simulated time, roughly 250 days. And the war that had been designed to last 10 years was dying. The Eastern Bloc was breaking apart. The loss of 40% of their forward fleet at the Verath corridor had been devastating, but it was not the killing blow. The killing blow was everything the humans had set in motion before the battle even started. Priya's economic sanctions were biting deep. The neutral factions that the Eastern Bloc had depended on for fuel, food, and manufacturing components were now part of the human coalition, and they had closed their borders to Eastern Bloc trade. Shipyards could not get raw materials. Factories could not get parts. Military bases could not get food. The Eastern Bloc's economy, which had been stretched thin by years of war, began to collapse like a building whose foundation had been quietly removed. And then there was the information war. Jaewon had spent the entire simulation planting seeds inside the Eastern Bloc's own society. He had identified opposition groups, peace movements, and discontented military officers through careful analysis of internal communications. He had not created these groups. They had always existed, suppressed and silenced by a government that needed unity to justify its war. What Jaewon did was give them information. He leaked records of war crimes committed by Eastern Bloc forces, civilian casualties covered up by military commanders, and secret financial dealings between government officials and arms manufacturers. He did not make propaganda. He made the truth available to people who had been denied it. The effect was devastating. Protests erupted on 3 Eastern Bloc homeworlds. A senior military commander publicly defected, issuing a statement calling the war a crime against his own people. The government tried to suppress the unrest, but they were fighting on too many fronts at once: military, economic, political, and social, and they did not have enough hands to hold it all together. Mara watched the Eastern Bloc's collapse on her display with the same calm expression she had worn since the simulation began. She had seen this pattern before, not in simulations or textbooks, but in Earth's own history. She knew how empires fell. They did not fall because they lost one battle. They fell because they lost the ability to convince their own people that the fight was worth the cost. She had spent the entire simulation making sure that cost was as high as possible. At the 53rd minute, the Eastern Bloc's government sent a message requesting peace talks. Mara read the message, then handed it to Priya. She did not accept their first offer. This was deliberate. Priya had studied negotiation theory, and she knew that the first offer from a desperate government would be designed to preserve as much of their power as possible. They needed to know that preserving their power was no longer an option. Mara sent back a counter-proposal. Her terms were sweeping: complete demilitarization of all offensive fleets, restructuring of the Eastern Bloc's government to include civilian oversight and free elections, full accountability for war crimes with an independent tribunal, reparations paid not to the human coalition, but to the civilian populations that had suffered the most during the war, open borders and free trade with all coalition members, and a permanent ban on the development of weapons of mass destruction. In the real Krithan War, terms like these would have been laughed out of the room. No defeated power would accept such complete surrender. But the simulation's AI calculated the Eastern Bloc's remaining options, and it found none. Their fleet was shattered. Their economy was collapsing. Their population was turning against them. Their allies had abandoned them. And the human coalition, which now included the former Western Bloc and all the neutral factions, controlled the vast majority of the theater's economic and military power. The Eastern Bloc accepted. In the gallery, someone made a sound that might have been a gasp, or might have been a sob. It was hard to tell. The simulation map was almost entirely blue now. The war was over, but the humans were not finished. Mara told her squad they had one more job. Winning the war was not enough. The simulation judged teams on the stability of the peace they created, and Mara knew from human history that the most dangerous moment was not the war itself, but the years that followed. A bad peace could plant the seeds for the next war. She was not going to let that happen. In the final minutes, the human squad worked with the same focused intensity they had shown from the beginning, but now they were building instead of breaking. Priya drafted a post-war economic framework that redistributed resources to the regions that had been most damaged by the fighting. She created trade agreements that bound the former enemies together with mutual economic dependence, so that attacking each other would mean destroying their own prosperity. She modeled the framework on something humans had built after one of their own world wars, an economic community that turned bitter enemies into partners within a generation. Jaewon designed a joint intelligence sharing network that would allow all factions to monitor each other's military activities transparently. No more secrets, no more paranoia, no more arms races driven by fear of what the other side might be building. The network was built on a principle J1 called trust through transparency, and it was specifically designed to make surprise attacks impossible. Ren created an infrastructure plan for the demilitarized zones. Instead of empty buffer territories patrolled by suspicious soldiers, he designed them as economic hubs, trade stations, research centers, medical facilities, and cultural exchange programs. The border between the former enemies would not be a wall. It would be a bridge. Lena wrote the doctrine for a combined peacekeeping force drawn from all factions. The force would be jointly commanded, jointly funded, and bound by strict rules of engagement that Lena based on peacekeeping frameworks from Earth's own turbulent history. The force would not belong to any single faction. It would belong to all of them. And Mara chaired the Peace Summit. She sat at the head of a simulated conference table and guided the representatives of every faction in the theater through the most comprehensive peace treaty the Crithan scenario had ever produced. She was patient where patience was needed, firm where firmness was required, and generous in ways that surprised everyone watching. She gave the Eastern Bloc dignity in defeat. She gave the Western Bloc security and peace. She gave the small factions a voice they had never had before. She built a peace that was not just the absence of war, but the presence of something better. At the 57th minute and 43rd second of real time, the simulation ran its final assessment. It checked every indicator in its vast database. Unresolved territorial disputes, 0. Active hostile actors, 0. Economic instability within acceptable parameters. Probability of conflict recurrence within 50 simulated years, less than 2%. The words appeared on the central screen in the observation gallery, in large, clear text that everyone could read. Total victory. Comprehensive peace achieved. Simulation time elapsed, 341 days. 341 days, less than one simulated year. The previous record had been 4 months and 11 days, and it had not achieved comprehensive peace. Only military victory with ongoing instability. The humans had done both. They had ended the war and healed the wound. And they had done it in 57 minutes and 43 seconds of real time. The gallery was silent. It was the kind of silence that comes not from the absence of sound, but from the presence of something too large for sound. Hundreds of beings, from dozens of species, stared at the screens, at the blue map, at the final score, and none of them could find words in any language for what they had just witnessed. Then, from the middle of the gallery, a sound began. It was a clapping sound, 2 hands striking together in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It was a human gesture, and it was being made by a non-human. Silith Ore stood among the crowd, her iridescent wings folded tight against her back, her multifaceted eyes fixed on the human team's command pod feed. She was clapping. She had learned the gesture specifically for this moment, though she had not known until the gesture began that her hands would be shaking. One by one, other beings in the gallery joined. The Felisari pressed their palms together in their own tradition of respect. The Drovani stomped their feet. The Kaelori hummed deep bass notes of acknowledgement. The sound grew and grew until the gallery vibrated with it. 100 different species expressing the same thing in 100 different ways. In their small command pod, the 5 humans heard none of it. Mara was reviewing the final score. Ren was leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed. Jaewon was already analyzing what they could have done better. Lena was stretching her shoulders, working out the tension. Priya was saving copies of everything they had done. They did not know yet that they had just changed the galaxy's understanding of what humans were. They did not know that the recording of their simulation would be studied by military academies across the Union for the next century. They did not know that 3 senior officers on a battleship 2 systems away were already drafting urgent messages to their superiors. All they knew was that the job was done, and they had done it well. The door to Instructor General Jess's office was made of heavy kailori wood, dark and old, and carved with symbols of military honor. It opened silently when the 5 humans approached, as if the room itself had been waiting for them. Jess stood behind his desk. He was enormous in the small office, his 4 legs planted on the stone floor, his green scales pale in a way that his students would have recognized as deep unease. His desk was clean, except for a single datapad showing the final simulation results. He had been staring at those results for 20 minutes. The numbers had not changed, no matter how many times he looked. He told the humans to sit. There were not enough chairs for all of them, because his office had never needed to accommodate 5 visitors at once. Ren and Lena remained standing. Nobody complained. Jess looked at them for a long time before he spoke. He had commanded fleets. He had fought in 3 real engagements during his career. He had designed the Krython scenario himself, building it over 15 years from the ashes of a real war that had consumed entire civilizations. He had watched hundreds of cadet teams attempt it. He had seen brilliance and failure and everything in between. He had never seen anything like what had just happened. He asked them one question. He asked them how. Mara did not answer immediately. She looked at her squad, at Ren, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, at Jaewon, who was watching Jess with those quiet, careful eyes, at Lena, who stood with her feet apart and her hands behind her back, like she was still on a battlefield, at Priya, who had her recorder out of habit, but had not turned it on out of respect. Then Mara looked back at Jess, and she began to explain. Not the version of Earth that the Union knew from its classification files, the gravity readings, the atmospheric composition, the predator density charts. She told him about the other Earth, the human Earth. She told him about 10,000 years of civilization built on a world that flooded and burned and froze and shook and never, not once, gave its children a moment of safety they did not earn with blood and cleverness and stubborn refusal to die. She told him that humans had been fighting wars since before they had metal. They fought with sticks and stones and bare hands. They fought over food and water and land and gods and ideas. They fought wars that lasted 100 years. They fought wars that ended in a single day. They fought wars on land and sea and in the air and under the ground and eventually in space. And with every war, they learned. They learned that a battle is not the same as a war. They learned that killing the enemy's soldiers is less effective than destroying the enemy's will to fight. They learned that controlling information is more powerful than controlling territory. They learned that economics is a weapon, and diplomacy is a weapon, and fear is a weapon, and hope is a weapon. They learned that the most dangerous army is not the largest one, but the one that understands why it is fighting. And they learned, through terrible experience and at terrible cost, that the hardest part of any war is not winning it, but building a peace that lasts. Every strategy they had used in the simulation, Mara said, came from human history. The economic blockade was based on tactics used in wars fought on Earth's oceans centuries ago. The disinformation campaign used principles that humans had been refining since before they had electricity. The coalition building was modeled on alliances that had reshaped Earth's political landscape after its most devastating conflicts. The final battle in the Verith Corridor used a flanking doctrine adapted from a naval engagement fought with wooden ships and cannons. And the peace treaty was built on the framework of an economic community that humans had created after a war that killed 60 million of their own people. A community that turned enemies into partners and made another war between them unthinkable. None of it was new, Mara said. All of it was old. Older than spaceflight. older than computers. Some of it was older than writing. The humans had not invented a new way to win. They had simply brought their entire history into the room and used it. Jess was quiet for a long time after Mara finished. Then he asked a second question. He asked why no other species in the Union thought about warfare this way. It was Jaewon who answered. He spoke softly, as he always did, choosing his words with the same precision he used for everything else. He said that most species in the Galactic Union had evolved on worlds that were kind to them. Worlds with stable climates, gentle gravity, predictable ecosystems. Those species had developed civilization in relative safety. They learned warfare late, as an unnatural thing, a disruption of their normal existence. When they fought wars, they fought them the way they approached every other problem, rationally, methodically, within established frameworks. Humans did not have that luxury, Jaewon said. Earth was not kind. Earth was a world of earthquakes and hurricanes and droughts and plagues and ice ages. Every generation of humans had faced extinction-level threats. War was not an aberration for humans. It was woven into the fabric of their survival from the very beginning. And because it was so fundamental, they had explored every possible dimension of it. Military, economic, psychological, social, cultural, informational, spiritual. Humans did not see war as a single problem to be solved with a single tool. They saw it as an entire ecosystem, and they had learned to operate within that ecosystem the way a predator learns to operate within a jungle. By understanding every part of it, every connection, every weakness, every opportunity. The difference, Jaewon said, was not that humans were smarter, or braver, or more ruthless than other species. The difference was that humans had been practicing for this their entire existence as a species. 10,000 years of continuous, desperate, creative warfare. No other species in the Union had anything close to that depth of experience. Jess dismissed them after that. He thanked them formally, which was unusual for him, and he watched them leave with an expression that none of his colleagues had ever seen on his face before. When the door closed, Jess sat down heavily, his massive frame settling onto his reinforced chair with a groan of metal. He opened a classified communication channel to Galactic Union High Command. The connection took several seconds to establish, routing through encrypted relays across 3 star systems. When it was ready, Jess recorded a short message. His voice was calm and steady, but the paleness of his scales told a different story. He said, "Reassess Deathworld species threat classification. Immediately. These beings do not merely fight wars, they understand them. They understand them the way a river understands a canyon, completely, patiently, and from the inside." He paused, then added, "They also understand peace, and I am not sure which should concern us more." He closed the channel and sat alone in the silence of his office for a very long time. In the corridor outside, Silith Ore was waiting. She stood perfectly still, her wings pressed flat against her back, her posture formal and rigid. When the humans emerged, she stepped in front of them and stopped. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Silith bowed. It was a deep bow, a full incline of her upper body, with her wings spreading slightly in a gesture that Vellani reserved for those they considered worthy of their highest respect. It was not a gesture she had ever expected to give to a human. She told Mara that she had been wrong. She said it simply, without excuse or decoration. She said the humans had shown her something she had never imagined was possible, and she would spend the rest of her career trying to understand it. Mara smiled. She held out her hand. Silith looked at it, recognizing the human greeting, and took it carefully, wrapping her long, delicate fingers around Mara's palm, as if she were handling something fragile. Then, She felt the strength in Mara's grip. Not crushing, not aggressive, but solid and controlled and absolutely certain. And she realized with a sudden start that it was Mara who was being gentle with her. The 5 humans walked together to the station's rooftop garden. It was a quiet place, a dome of glass and growing things that looked out at the endless stars. They sat on a bench that was slightly too small for all of them, shoulders pressed together. And for a while they just breathed and looked at the universe. Ren broke the silence first. He said they probably should have taken longer, just to be polite. Priya said they could always run it again and pretend to struggle. Lena said they were being polite. She had not used any of the really unpleasant strategies they had discussed the night before. Jaewon asked which ones she meant, and Lena listed 3. Ren laughed and said those were war crimes. Lena said that on Earth they were called Tuesdays. Jaewon did not laugh. He was looking at the stars with an expression that was hard to read. After a while, he said something quiet. He said that every species out there looked at humans and saw monsters from a death world. Short-lived, violent, dangerous. And he said that maybe they were right. Maybe humans were exactly that. But he said that monsters could also build things. Monsters could also choose peace. And monsters who understood war better than anyone else in the galaxy were maybe the best ones to make sure it never happened again. Nobody argued with him. The thought hung in the air between them like something too important to touch. Mara was the last to speak. She looked at her squad, her team, her people. 5 humans from a world of fire and flood and war and stubborn, relentless hope. 5 cadets who had just shown the galaxy what 10,000 years of survival looked like when it walked into a room and sat down at the controls. She said, "Let them underestimate us." Every species they had met, every alien who had looked at them with pity or fear or contempt, let them keep thinking that humans were nothing but savages from a dangerous rock. It would be the last mistake they ever made. The stars burned on, cold and endless, and the 5 humans from Earth sat together in the light of 100 distant suns and said nothing more. They did not need to. They had said everything that mattered in 57 minutes and 43 seconds. And the galaxy would be talking about it for a very long time.